call it Battle of Lurwayizo. It is the three elements. The interpretation of us, because most of us in the world, the people that are coming to the world, because if you have not been involved in the soil of the outbreak. That's why we try to extract those
What we just heard there is from Mr. Mangalio from Dicenta, a community member of Mbhashe, South Africa, leader of Goals and Liberation Struggle effort. And the picture you see here is of the ruins of the original Mbhashe family home, which apartheid police forces burned on the day of that battle in January of 1960. Named after that battle, our conservation partner, Battle of Lurwayizo Development, or GOLD, takes the historical lessons to move from conflict towards peace and sustainable development. Through this research project, Kylee and I had the opportunity to support that mission through the documentation of community oral history.
In case you're unfamiliar, apartheid essentially means apartness. It was a government and policy that lasted for those years, and it essentially removed non-white South Africans from participating in daily life, such as being excluded from healthcare, being excluded from the economy. Moreover, it moved Black South Africans out of city centers into rural provinces, and it inhibited the development of these rural provinces. And although this period in this government only lasted from those years, which is less than a lifetime, the effects are still very much felt today. More so, we specifically were examining Mbhashe, which is located in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa, which is one of those more rural and more underdeveloped provinces. And then one of the largest challenges there, which Lindsay and I got to experience firsthand, was there is an absolute lack of road infrastructure. There's utter reliance on dirt roads that are poorly maintained, and within that is the inability to access healthcare services because of that. Moreover, there's a lot of local nature reserves in the area. This province encompasses what's called the Wild Coastline, which is entirely beautiful. However, currently citizens can't really use it to promote ecotourism or anything else in the area due to ongoing conflict.
To explore those challenges, we had a lot of help. We have two South African postgrad students there who you can see in some of these pictures back in India. We also worked with the Mbhashe local municipality and the University of Port Blair, where we plan to preserve these oral histories in addition to that. But mainly we work with GOLD. And as an organization, they wear many different hats to support sustainable development. From community and environmental health to cultural heritage and youth engagement, no one day ever looks the same for GOLD. And while we were there, we had the honor of attending several events, including a youth soccer tournament, a traditional wedding, a battle commemoration event where the deputy president of the country spoke. And all of those initiatives are driven by GOLD in the communities of Mbhashe. But between all of those amazing experiences, we did do research with the objective to conduct oral history interviews focused on community lived experiences and knowledge from the battle and the liberation struggle under apartheid to better understand how those historical legacies shape current challenges. So I took a more environmental lens, looking at the role of the land in those legacies, the impacts on livelihoods, and hopes for a future of environmental justice.
Moreover, I took on a little bit more of a public health lens, and then within that was exploring this interrelationship between past conflicts and current health outcomes, and examining how apartheid continues to impact the health of South Africans. So digging a little bit more into that, we have legacies of injustice related to those apartheid policies, which historically excluded non-white South Africans from accessing healthcare or accessing education to enter the healthcare field. And within that, when we were speaking to community members, is this major concern over the inequitable distribution of disease, specifically pertaining to HIV and tuberculosis, both of which are classified as communicable diseases. But alongside that is the area doesn't necessarily have a strong prevalence of agriculture. And so there's also a need to use these shelf-stable foods that are typically highly processed. So now you're starting to see a dual burden of disease as things like diabetes are on the rise. And then moreover, continuing within that is this need for preventative care services in the area. South African healthcare, although it is technically guaranteed to every citizen, it is not necessarily accessible to every citizen. And within that, it is very reactive. I think a great example of this is PEP is more common there. When we actually made it to a clinic, they were talking about how they have PEP, which is post-exposure prophylaxis for HIV. In the US and in Western continents, you may be more familiar with PrEP, which is pre-exposure. And it shows how the South African healthcare system is currently overwhelmed and underfunded and under-resourced to the point where we're having to be more reactive and not focus on preventative care services, which would help equalize this distribution of disease.
And from the environmental lens, a key question that arose for me during these interviews was how the land represents both a historical tool for oppression and an opportunity for justice. So as Kylee mentioned earlier, Mbhashe is home to the Lurwayizo Nature Reserve, a marine protected area. But pre-apartheid, the colonial government removed communities from that land to establish the reserve. And community access continues to be limited, requiring permits or supervision. But also something that became apparent through the interviews is how the land supported the fight against oppression. Mr. Jafta, for example, talked about the role of land in the battle, how he used tree twigs and spider webs to see if someone had been through the forest and communicate with his fellow friends. And also how it represents a promise for the future. So something we asked in every oral history interview was, what would you like to see change? And community members brought up ecotourism, agriculture, and of course, wanting increased access to the reserve for livelihoods, history traditions, and education.
So then speaking a little bit more on the oral histories that we conducted, we obviously interviewed a lot of different people. No one interview was the same, and they were conducted in all multitudes of places. However, within that, one thing that really stood out to us was the fact that when we were speaking specifically with the veterans, we were speaking with individuals who fought against the suppressionist regime between the ages of 18 to 23, at most around 25. And it really showed and demonstrated the courage and bravery it took to be a part of these liberation movements. Within that, we also were speaking to them, as Lindsay was just speaking about, on what they would like to see, because we realized that a lot of the things that they were promised and what they fought for have not been idolized in South Africa to this day. And so getting to speak to them about what they want to see in future generations was one of the most important and honestly impactful parts of this research.
So you may still be wondering, how do oral histories support conservation and health? No matter where in the world you work for conservation or human health, there will always be a history there, and most likely a complicated history that still impacts how people relate to and understand the land, who has access, and who does not. So to support the well-being of people in the planet, it's necessary to understand this, to work towards more justice.
And within that, our partners at BOLD, their overall saying is, how do we move from peace to justice and eventually prosperity? This is actually the third installment of a collaboration between BOLD and the IIC. And this installation, we're really looking at how we can promote prosperity in the area. And I think as we look towards the future installations, through our conversations with BOLD, the community, and the IIC, there's clearly a very immense need for youth engagement, specifically fostering youth to go into fields such as healthcare and agriculture to boost both their livelihood and the community. Moreover, it's that general bolstering of the local economy, which is seen through developing the road infrastructure and also promoting ecotourism in the area, because we truly can attest to how beautiful the area is. And then moreover, it's this continuation of these oral histories. So we use past legacies and past conflicts to inform current development so that we ensure that it's sustainable and community good. And on that note, we just want to acknowledge our mentors and the local communities that help support us throughout this.
So, yes, we would like to end by thanking both, specifically Mrs. Jafta and Mr. Jafta. Also would like to thank Dr. Lisa Sandela, who serves on the ICE board, who really developed this relationship, as well as Dr. Yabo, who built this partnership that has now been running for 2 years. So both sent this reflection. In August 2025, the Battle of Lurwayizo, we received our 5th group of research students from the ISC. This year, Bold came up with the research topic. As Bold, we revisited our vision for conflict and peace and sustainable development. And we also interrogated the type of legacy we want to leave behind to the people who are in. Working with the Liberation War veterans, there was consensus that we would record, transcribe, edit, and finally archive our history institutions both in the US and in South Africa. Most importantly, we wanted to visit every village to impart the importance of education and the study of natural sciences as the most probable way to conserve our environment while looking for economic beneficiations for the rural Lurwayizo village. It seemed the team from William and Mary University did not disappoint. Their first point of call was for Mary University and Alice where the information would be archived. It was not easy for them to engage with the veterans immediately by way of interview, but eventually overcame digital guilt. The following interviews proceeded well. Hosting these students have great returns for both, ably engaging academic outsiders who are able to objectively interrogate our aspirations, which are preserving the South African liberation history in Mbhashe local municipality, developing the people of Lurwayizo to be self-sufficient and able to benefit from their natural resources, parallel to conservation of these natural resources for future generations, intervention to improve the lives of young people throughout sports and education. It is indeed always a pleasure to host the students from William and Mary, as Bold, we wish them the very best along this.